It was about 10 minutes before the bell was supposed to buzz, signifying the 7-minute-long break from our daily torture, that the intercom system crackled to life. We will now be having a lockdown drill. We request everyone stay calm and follow the instructions of their current teacher. If you're outside your classroom, we ask that you please make your way back in a timely manner. Thank you. When the school doors suddenly lock, the most frightening thing isn't the silence, but the things still moving in the dark. Every hallway holds a secret never told, and every faint sound leads you deeper into another clue. If you want to step into a world where whispers become the key, make sure to like, share, and subscribe to Kryden Murmur, where every lockdown opens a new story. And now, let it get started. Story 1. The view from our classroom windows is nothing but a murky white. I bet if I went outside and looked down, I wouldn't be able to see past my knees. I won't be going outside, though. I honestly don't think I'll leave this classroom for a while. Our class, Gothic Literature, was supposed to end at 1:30. I remember just staring at the clock, watching the seconds tick by, feeling Mr. Sampson's voice drone through my body, the monotone sound killing me into a haze of sleepy existence. I didn't get much sleep last night, and it certainly shows. The classroom was lit solely by the fluorescent bulbs flickering on the ceiling, Sampson having closed the blinds to avoid distracted glances about 15 minutes in. I wonder now if we would have noticed the building fog outside had the blinds been open. Maybe we would have clamored together by the window, whispering in excitement to each other. Anything that wasn't hearing, for the 10th time that week, how revolutionary Mary Shelley was for that time, or hearing Susan beg him to cover Carmilla. Just for half a lesson, Mr. Sampson. It isn't unusual for a mess of high schoolers to grow distracted and excited at any little change. I mean, who can blame us with the constant repetition? Regardless, I've gone too far off topic. It was about 10 minutes before the bell was supposed to buzz, signifying the 7-minute-long break from our daily torture, that the intercom system crackled to life. We will now be having a lockdown drill. We request everyone stay calm and follow the instructions of their current teacher. If you're outside your classroom, we ask that you please make your way back in a timely manner. Thank you. I heard the collective groans of students who didn't want to crawl under their desks in the dark. Really, the only thing worse than this lecture is the singular sound of your deskmates breathing, penetrating a heavy cover of silence. Nevertheless, we're used to lockdown drills by now. The class shuffled slowly, desks creaking as students stood and crouched. Susan shoved herself under the teacher's desk, whilst Jamie and Audrey stood shoulder to shoulder in the tiny alcove just behind the doorway. We all waited with frustrated, bated breaths, knowing that in just a few seconds we'd hear someone try the doorknob, apparently to scare us. It never works. And then the intercom system announced the drill was over. But those sounds didn't come. Instead, all there was, silence. The reintroduction of sound started with a couple in the back corner whispering and giggling to each other. Students, growing more impatient, began talking to each other. It took 10 minutes before Mr. Sampson himself moved to his desk, shooing Susan out in the process in an attempt to get some work done. 10 more minutes passed. He grew frustrated and motioned us back to our seats. That was when someone peeked outside. I'm not sure what they were looking for. maybe to see if this was a different sort of drill, or if maybe it wasn't a drill at all. It didn't take long for everyone else to be made aware of the oddity that was the outside world. Hey, guys, I can't see outside. It's like hella foggy. I think her name was Ashley. I worked on a lab project with her once. Shit, she's right. A guy chimed in from across the room. Jesus, that's some massive blockage. Imagine driving in that. It can't be foggy, it's not even humid out. Plus, already lunchtime. Way too late for fog. Susan snorted. You know, like a smartass. Well, it's clearly something. Do you think it's fucking with the cell phone towers? I don't have any reception. Ashley spoke again. Guys, come on. No phones in class. We just touched on this day before yesterday. Despite Samson's protests, there was a quiet murmur of agreement. People who'd either checked their phones prior and noticed the same thing, or those who were checking them now and, well, noticing the same thing. Weather does screwy things, guys, who knows? I finally interjected my own opinion, shrugging my shoulders. A few more murmurs, slowly growing louder in volume as friends and desk mates began talking to each other to alleviate the boredom. 5 minutes later, whatever the weather is doing to our phones clearly has done something else. Our electric went out. We could still connect to the Wi-Fi, obviously I'm writing this, aren't I? But nothing else. Lights burnt out, the projector wouldn't turn on. Even the hum of the air conditioner that we hardly notice anymore just went silent. It was around 2 a.m. we heard the first scream. It was horrible and blood-curdling, and it came from outside. We could hear it reverberate from the glass window, cold to the touch. As I'd find out later, the first of many screams to come. Some kid had decided to go outside. We didn't know that yet, though. Mr. Sampson had clearly had enough. I'm going to check with Ms. Young next door. Stay put. Lock the door behind me. I'll be back shortly. Standing from his desk, he took brisk steps to the classroom door, exiting with the confidence only an authority figure has. We followed his instructions. For a while, at least. Minutes ticked by. Finally, around 2:30, we decided to just leave. What were they going to do? We'd been left with no guidance. Just a bunch of kids who totally didn't know better, right? It was cold outside as I passed the threshold. You know when you enter a Walmart at midnight and everything is just weird, like you're on a different plane? That's kind of what this felt like. The halls were dark, silent. The only light strewn in through the double doors in Hall B, casting large shadows behind doorways. The fog pressed against the door, almost ominously. I'm leaving. The guy from earlier shrugged, headed towards the doorway. What if they turn the alarms on? The doors will sound, especially if we're on a lockdown, Ashley pointed out. Power's out. I doubt they are. He called from behind him. I only looked over at him when I heard the doors open. Immediately, he began screaming. He jerked away from the door as if he'd been burned. The air smelled like chlorine and bleach. Maybe a bit of formaldehyde that the zoology class uses during exams. The doors swung shut the second he'd let go, the fog quickly dissipating. Audrey rushed over to him, trying to help. What's a matter, Josh? She set a hand on his shoulder before jerking her own hand back, letting out a sharp exhale as if she'd been burned. Because she had. She seemed to notice the situation almost instantly, shrinking back from the cowering boy in front of her, now letting out raspy and crackling moans of pain. It reminded me of someone with pneumonia, the sound of it. Burning. His skin was burning, bright red and blistering, and so was the palm of Audrey's hand. It's a chemical burn. What touched them? There's a shower in the science lab. We should get them there. How did this happen? 30 voices all at once. We split up in the end. 5 of them headed to 2B, the lab with the supposed shower. The rest of us headed into the classroom, half of us eerily quiet, the other chattering in confusion and alarm. And here we are, folks. A couple hours later, in a classroom surrounded by white, a fog of chemicals. We should find someone who knows what's going on. We can't just sit here, can we? And yet, that's exactly what we're doing. I'm posting this. You guys seem to know your way out of some less than ideal situations. I'm at a loss. I'm scared. We have a lot of good news and a lot of bad news. Everything is jumbled up in my head right now, and my hands won't stop shaking, so please bear with me. Some minor bad news first. I can't smell. Ever since I could smell the gas, I just can't anymore. Everything burnt for a while, and then it just stopped. My nose is constantly congested, and even when it's not, there's just nothing. I'm incredibly frustrated by this. It doesn't help that it feels harder to breathe, like a big weight is sitting on my chest. I don't know if that's just my grief getting the best of me, or an omen of something worse and unseen. Also, we aren't going to piss on things. I'm sorry, I know that's probably the smart option, but we've collectively decided that dignity still holds firm, as much as it can right now anyways. The good news. The lot of us followed some of your advice. While we don't have advanced science materials, funding, what's funding? We did have trash bags and duct tape. We sealed off 2 classrooms and used coats and emergency blankets to make bedding for us last night. And I was right. It was a long night. Ashley eventually cried herself to sleep, I think around 1 a.m. It was late. The classroom was so dark. It's hard to explain. You spend so much time around light pollution or under a blanket of stars and moonlight that it's really fucking jarring when you can't make out anything at all. There's nothing for your eyes to adjust to. It's just pitch blackness. I'm sorry. It really shook me up, guys. This morning, the first thing we did was head up to the roof. I was one of the stupid people that decided to. Once we got up there, we noticed that the fog reaches the top of the 2nd story. It just barely brushes the edges of the roof. It's also massive. I can't see the end of it, and that's saying something considering I can see the town. That, admittedly, worried a few of us a lot. What about our parents, our siblings? A few people had family out of town. I wasn't one of them. My calls ring through, but no one ever answered. I cried. A lot. I have no idea if they're okay or not. There are miles and miles of fog. We're stranded in a rickety boat on a monstrously huge ocean. I don't think anyone would help us, even if someone who could was in the town. How would anyone even get to us? Somewhere along the line, everyone filtered off the roof and back into the school, and I was left alone, staring off into a sea of gray and white. After a very long time of just sitting and staring out into the mist, I slowly rose, making my way back down the stairs. Ashley was crying again. I could hear her faintly, her sobs bouncing off the school walls. I rapped gently on the lab door. Audrey was there, holding her wrapped hand. I'm heading to the cafeteria. Did you want to come with me? It felt like the one nicety we could afford right now, trying to include people. Sure, not like I'm any use here. She lowered herself from the lab table she'd been sitting on, following me out of the classroom. As we passed over the doorway, I tried not to look at the sheet covering Josh, brown with dried blood that had seeped from his burns. I wonder if it smelled like rot. Our footsteps were our only company for a while, our tennis shoes squeaking against the waxed floor. "How's your hand?" I tentatively asked. "I mean, it doesn't hurt anymore. I can't feel much of anything in it, if I'm being completely honest." That didn't seem good. I read something once about how once a burn got bad enough, you couldn't feel it anymore. Once it ate through your skin and down through your very nerve endings. Have you heard from your family? No, the entire town is like this. We could see it from the roof. Her polite smile dropped at this. Have you? A few of my cousins, they live out in Ohio. I can't reach anyone else, though. We aren't even on the news, Sam. No one has heard anything about us. There's a blockade on the town line. She drove down last night to check, but the guys there won't tell my cousin anything, just that the town is zoned off until stated otherwise. Her voice wavered before she cleared her throat, pulling her gaze from mine. I looked down at my feet. "That's weird," I managed in response. I felt a lump in my throat as emotions threatened to overwhelm me too. I didn't want to be like Ashley, crying over something I had no control over. Helpless. That's exactly what we are. Even weirder, we haven't seen any of our classmates. Where are they? Where is Mr. Sampson? And that shit the fog did to Josh and I? What if someone opens the main doors? I don't know, I admitted shakily. It was when we reached the hallway in front of the cafeteria that I heard her gag audibly, covering her face with her hands. What? What's wrong? A field of corpses. We could see them from the window on the door before we could open the cafeteria doors. Dried blood coated the floor in front of dead eyes and slack jaws. Jesus, I managed. The smell, Audrey's wretches. I suppose I got my answer. It smelled like rot. I could taste it just faintly, in the air I breathed. "Oh my God, oh my God!" She heaved again, doubled over, clutching at her stomach with her bad hand. I set a hand on her shoulder. It likely wasn't safe to be near there. "Come on." I pulled her down the hallway. There goes perishable foods. We could probably loot the vending machines, though. They're all dead. Sam, what happened? The dead can't speak. It was the verbal equivalent of a shrug. Someone must have left a window open. I don't know. Lunch C would have been occurring around the time the lockdown went into place. I shook my head. "We need to tell the others." I tugged her gently after me. I felt numb, trapped. I wondered if I screamed off of the roof, just yelled at the top of my lungs, if there was anyone left to hear me at all. Samantha? Audrey? Standing there when we rounded the corner was Ms. Young. Audrey stifled a sob, running forward to hug her on instinct. "Dear, what happened to your hand?" The woman rested a hand on her back, looking up at me. "I tried to help Josh." Her voice was muffled. "I tried so hard." "The cafeteria is dangerous," I whispered, pure ecstatic relief rushing through my veins. "I figured. Come on, mine and a few other classes are holed up in the auditorium. The teachers are trying to collect stragglers right now, anyone we can find. It isn't safe to be roaming around right now." She gently pulled Audrey off her, coaxing us both down winding halls and labeled doors. At least 100 kids were in the auditorium. I recognized a few, and so did Audrey. A few yells of joy were heard, a few kids were crying. Emotions were overall mixed. I suppose we found out where the others went, though. It wasn't until dark that everyone, as many as they could find anyways, finished slowly filtering their way through the auditorium doors. The only light that accompanied us was the occasional phone screen. Miss Young was a force of life in the dark curtain that enclosed us all. "Quiet, everyone," she shouted, holding up a hand. It took a few tries before a hush fell over the room. Even through the darkness, you could tell her expression was solemn. "Miss Whittaker, Mr. Wardle, and myself are the only teachers we've found so far. It would appear, as I'm sure many of yourselves have already discovered to be the case, that we are unable to leave this school. You'll find that any efforts to will result in bodily harm. The air outside is incredibly dangerous. We ask that you all refrain from opening any outside doors, along with going down the language hallway, math hallway, or cafeteria hallway. Each of these are areas that have open windows. While you can see the fog in some, in others it is not so readily visible." A pause. She peered out at all of us. "We have yet to get into contact with anyone in town, but we are working on contacting the proper officials. We ask that you all stay calm in the meanwhile. Food will be supplied to you as often as we possibly can, along with water. But please avoid running taps for the time being, as that water could be contaminated. We are doing our best, and promise we'll get you all home safe as sound as soon as possible." With that, she walked off to convene with the other teachers. Students clamored, a wave of pure chaos and sound erupting throughout the room. "My parents. My friends were at lunch. Are they okay? Does anyone have a charger? I'm starved. I hate this. My sister is home alone. Can't we just leave?" It was a while before things settled down, and I figured I would update all of you. Clearly some sort of officials know what's going on because the town is walled off. I don't know how the teachers intend on contacting people in town, but I do believe they'll try their best. The worry on Ms. Whittaker's face told that. I think one or two of them are parents themselves. Audrey, along with a few other students who got exposed, are getting looked at right now. Mr. Wardell teaches chem, so I'm hoping he can help her. This can't last long, right? I mean, the cloud has to dissipate eventually, doesn't it? Doesn't it? I haven't heard any animals since everything started. Usually you can hear the birds from classrooms on a good day, with how thin the walls are, but I can't even hear them from the roof. And trust me, I tried. I went up there last night to get some sort of air away from the mugginess of 100 sweaty teenagers. But the silence was even worse. God, I have a cat at home. I keep thinking about her. I hope she's okay. I don't remember anyone leaving any windows open when I left for school, but it's been a couple days, so my memory is questionable at best. This morning, 10 of us woke up sick, myself included. Fever, nausea, congestion. I overheard Miss Whittaker talking to Miss Young. She thinks a few of us have pneumonia. As soon as they found out we were sick, a mass effort was made to tape off any vents and doorways to the outside. A sort of makeshift quarantine, school-wide. I heard they managed to reclaim the cafeteria somehow, but I honestly don't want to go there. I don't think all the bleach in the school could clean up that much blood, and God knows what they did with the bodies. They did, on a brighter note, get the generator up and running. It's nice to have light again, especially in the bathrooms. Pissing in the dark is no easy task, let me tell you that. I got urine on my hands and pants more than once. Nevermore have I wished I had a dick, but I think even if I did, it would have still been a hassle. We only have about a week's worth of gas, so we shut it off during the daylight to conserve it. Audrey won't talk to me about her hand. I've tried asking her what Mr. Wardle told her, but she won't budge. She just stares off into the distance and gives a small shrug of her shoulders. Whatever it was, I can't imagine it was good news. I would have given her a hug, but it was advised we avoid physical contact with those ill for the time being, which, unfortunately, once again, includes me. I can't count the number of times I've dry heaved on my own snot. I woke up around 3 in the morning, gagging and coughing. I was hesitant to fall back asleep. There isn't enough room to sleep on our side in the auditorium, and aspirating is a very real fear of mine. I doubt it's realistic, but it's a fear nonetheless. I'm burning up at 102 last we checked, which is just perfect. A few of the students are rambling about the fog and this being related, but there was a pretty bad bout of the flu going around my town before we got locked up in here. I have no doubts that some kid's asshole parent made them come to school, and they managed to infect us all. Ashley's finally stopped crying. I think she realized that it won't do her any good, and was actually doing the exact opposite. I noticed a lot of the students avoiding her last night. Emotions can be caught just as easily as a virus. I think most of us have shut down to avoid that at this point. No one wants to be exposed and vulnerable at this point in time. That being said, there are a couple students who aren't keeping to themselves, bringing water to those of us that are sick, blankets to those shivering, and at one point a couple kids got some instruments out of the band room and played a couple songs. It was actually really nice. It makes you forget, at least for a bit, the severity of the situation we're in. The ones helping are trying to do more than survive, something that a lot of us aren't attempting at this point in time. The situation has reached a pinnacle of severity, though. We only have enough food for a couple weeks. A few of us are diabetic or have chronic or mental illnesses, medications for which we don't keep at school. I haven't had Ambien in 3 days. The nightmares for me are horrific. I would do anything to make them stop, and I know this is only the beginning for me. I can't imagine what withdrawals some of us are going through, especially the drug dealers. I've seen a couple people pace down the hallways when they thought no one was looking, or slither off into an empty room. We've had a couple kids have complete breakdowns, be them sobbing or fits of anger. We had a panic attack or two last night. On top of those fucky issues, 2 of the kids had a fucking fistfight in the hallway. I heard the shouting. It kept me up. At some point, the teachers broke it up, but it's clear tensions are building fast. Too many hormonal kids stuffed in a room together without medication. I want to feel bad for my classmates, I really do. But I just find myself stuck on the most mundane things possible. I guess I'm avoiding the situation in a way. On the bright side, we can't exactly take finals at a time like this, so studying isn't really necessary, though I have seen a couple of the AP students in the library hunched over stacks of study guides. Weird kids, those are. Whatever helps you cope, though, I guess. A lot of you wanted me to wander off on my own. I'm glad I didn't, both because of my lack of skills and sudden sickness. And also because I spotted a familiar face in the crowd once the lights were on. Seth and I have been friends since freshman year, so it was a happy reunion. He gave me back the book he borrowed a couple days ago. It feels like weeks as of now, and it was one of my favorites, so when I'm able to, I've been reading that. I was fucking dying of boredom. Survival is really dull after a while of it. I did find a couple manuals in the library for water filtration and shared them with Ms. Young. She agreed on both this and reaching out to the news outlet, so our day has mostly been focused on those two things. Audrey got in contact with her cousins, who finally got one of the guys at the blockade to talk. Somehow. He confirmed that it's a chemical spill, and that they're working on resolving the issue. They can't, for their own safety, attempt a rescue operation until everything is cleaned up. There's no telling how long it will take, though. I've heard they're still trying to keep it on the down low, but I've been trying to avoid the news lately, so I don't know for sure. I do know that the fog is getting worse somehow. You can hardly see outside the second story anymore, and it crawls over the edge of the roof according to some band kid. Some kid named Brady did go missing. They thought they managed to wall of the language hall, but the stupid fuck went and opened the goddamn doors. Managed to shove the doorstop under it, too. We're lucky the teachers walled off the separate hallways. They're hesitant to let anyone wander near the outside doors now and have set up a few posts of supervision. Mostly kids who have seen some shit and managed to keep their shit together in the past. They haven't said that, but I saw Susan chilling in front of the doors to the math hall, and I know for a fact her family life is fucked. She's annoying as shit, but I suppose I trust her more than most of the rest of us. I did suggest before Brady went missing that we branch off into several rooms to sleep, so it's at least less crowded and stuffy, but after everything went down, that idea was quickly shot down as well. There goes some peace and quiet. I heard Mr. Wardell is working with a few of the science buffs to figure out how we can stop whatever is outside from hurting us even more, along with possibly the pipeline so that we have, safely, more water. But between that and kids who are already injured, his hands are pretty full. I did write down all of your suggestions and share them with him, just so he had some sort of starting point. He seemed grateful, so thank you all. One of the kids mentioned that a few of them were trying out some sort of makeshift suit, so more on that later, I suppose. I'm worried that one of the teachers will want to test it if he's telling the truth. They always say women and children first to be saved, but truth be told, the teachers have degrees. They've taken a variety of courses and seen much more shit than we have, not to mention have some semblance of mental stability. They aren't gods, but they're far more helpful than most of us are. We can't afford to lose them. I can't stop coughing. I need to rest for now. It's still pretty early in the evening, so I'll do my best to keep you all updated as the night progresses. In the meantime, if you guys have any advice about fevers, please let me know. We're too low on ibuprofen and Tylenol to afford using it just yet, but I'm absolutely miserable. I'm not dead. That about sums up the next 1K words for you. I'm alive, and so are some of the kids that were with me at the school. It's been 2 weeks since we got home, and things have been unsettlingly normal. Everyone just expects us to go back to our day-to-day lives as if nothing happened. The world continues turning despite our efforts to ground it. A lot of us lost family. I was one of the lucky few that didn't. Needless to be said, this will be my last update. I don't feel as though anything particularly horrifying is occurring anymore. I'm just trying to cope, I guess. Reaching out to you all to let you know that I'm alive. I need to talk about it a bit with people who haven't gone through it and aren't professionals. God knows I've seen enough of those. The government got involved, and it wasn't until several psychologists got involved that we, the students, were even allowed to talk to our families about everything that happened. Non-disclosure agreements and whatnot. They still want to keep everything hush-hush, and understandably so. It turns out a lot of you were right. They sat me down in the psychologist's office. I remember because the walls were so bare compared to ones I'd been in previously. A clock ticked on the wall, and what few trinkets lined the shelves were abstract. I fucking hate abstract art. I like to make sense of shit, not the exact opposite. Regardless, the man sat me down. He stared across at me from his own chair, glasses-framed eyes half slits, as he cautiously explained to me exactly what happened. A chemical plant malfunctioned. They believe it overheated. He explained to me in a voice sickeningly smooth. It felt like honey was being forced down my throat. Why didn't they come and get us sooner? We waited for a week in that hellhole, and in that time, a lot more people died. They didn't want to risk anyone else. They didn't think anyone survived. He explained. There wasn't a point in sending a rescue team for dead bodies they could recover once the fog cleared. No minced words there. It felt like I was floating, disconnected from my own body. I guess somewhere along the line I just shut down. About a week was spent just existing, pacing nervously, eating only when hunger pains crept their way into my bones, sleeping only when I would fade into unconsciousness as I walked. But you guys don't want to hear about that. You'll want to hear about what happened at the school. The flu caused fevers, horrible ones. Students already going through withdrawals snapped. One attempted to flood the theater room by opening up the main doors, but the teachers were able to stop him. They weren't able to stop a kid named Tyler from grabbing a knife and going on a stabbing spree, though. We lost 4 students and a teacher to that. Susan and Mr. Wardle were among the casualties. Tyler had made his way through Sudan's impromptu guard watch. Mr. Wardle tried to stop Tyler but was unsuccessful. I remember the screaming, deafeningly loud as it echoed throughout the large room, meant to only amplify sound. How ironic, right? We put the bodies in the basement, along with the others that had piled up. I volunteered to help. The smell that permeated the basement was sickening, an instinctually gut-wrenching smell that caused me to heave. I still had a fever when the fog began to clear enough that the police made their way through the doors. They checked all of us out individually and stayed with us for a day as we waited for the outside to be clear enough to leave. It was a restless night. Our rescue had come, and still we were trapped. Other than that, the school was mostly just boredom. Power went out somewhere along the line. We ran out of gas, hence my sudden radio silence, and most of the time was spent either talking to each other or just staring at walls in boredom. Without light, it was hard to read in most of the classrooms. The library had some windows, but not very many. Without fresh water, it was hard to bathe and use the restroom. Without fresh food, cooking was nullified and reduced to canned food. Any outlets for fun were gone, replaced with silence. And despite getting out, I still feel that way. I feel worse than when I was in school. Despite the amount of death I saw and the horror I was in, I felt fine, relatively speaking. Now I'm restless and frustrated. I can't sleep anymore, not unless I'm collapsing out of pure exhaustion. When I finally do, I have nightmares. There are times I wish nothing had ever happened, and unspeakably, times I wish I had never left the school. The only good thing is that Audrey and I became friends, companions over countless text messages meant to comfort and smooth one and other. She lost her hand. It was too damaged. They performed the amputation just a couple days ago. I went to visit her after the surgery. She didn't even seem fazed by it, just there for the ride, if that makes sense. It was like she didn't even register it. Despite the expected normalcy, everything feels anything but. I feel like a shadow of a person, walking their way through a stranger's life. It doesn't feel like mine anymore. The psychologist said it's due to trauma. I don't know. School starts back after Christmas. I don't want to go back. They talk a lot about horror being the events, but the aftermath is the real terror involved. The countless days of time lost to a wandering mind and empty body. I'm nothing more than a fear-filled husk expected to continue on as if nothing ever happened. I'm expected to celebrate Christmas with my family. I'm supposed to laugh and decorate the tree. I'm supposed to be excited to go back to school when break is over and see my friends. But I'm not. I'm just tired. Story 2 I hid in a closet during a school lockdown and heard what really happened. The truth is much worse than what they told us. I'm very happy I'm not in school anymore. I graduated a few years ago, but more and more every day I hear about incidents at school. On the news, on the internet, on texts my friends send me, all sorts of horror stories. But the stories online are the ones I'm always finding myself glancing through. I've seen stories online of people relating how their school went into lockdown, and the story ends up being about some hobo who had been living under the school, or some crazy person from down the street who finally snapped one day. I don't know if they're true, but all I know is our school went into lockdown once. And I don't know if even the people at my school know the whole story as to what happened. I don't even know if I understand it myself. It still seems like a sort of fever dream, something that didn't happen, couldn't happen. It was the middle of third period, math. I had just finished a big test. I found out later I had made a bunch of mistakes and ended up getting a D, but that's not really important to the story. I used the hall pass to go use the bathroom. Unfortunately, the school bathrooms were all located at the stairwells, and of course the bathrooms on the first floor, where I was, were closed for repairs. I had to go up to the second floor, but before I got there, the bell rang. The bell never rang during class before, but as it did, an announcement came over the PA. Students and faculty, we are entering lockdown. This is not a drill. Please, all students and faculty, follow all school procedures. I froze. I could hear sirens approaching. I came out of the stairwell, but already the doors in the hallway were closing, and I could hear them locking. I was alone, and out in the open. I could go into the bathroom now, but the doors had no locks on them since my freshman year. After some juniors trapped a freshman in the bathroom and duct-taped him inside a stall, they removed the ability to lock them at all. If there was somebody wandering the school, I'd have no chance if I went into there. I ran down the hall. I could see classrooms turning out their lights and covering the windows. I couldn't turn to them for help. All the instructions said to not answer the door. I had to find someplace safe nearby before something happened. I turned a corner and I saw my chance. The janitor's closet was open. Lunch was up next period, so he was probably out setting up tables when the announcement was made. He wasn't in there, and it could easily be locked from the inside, so I jumped in and shut off the light. The only light I saw was from the bottom of the door. I waited, and the sirens grew closer and eventually stopped. Time passed, and I wasn't sure if I was happy that I couldn't hear anything going on, or tense because I had no idea what was happening. Then I heard footsteps. Lots of them. They stopped in the hallway. It must have been police. I could hear radios and other assorted noises. I didn't think it could be some sort of lone gunman or nutcase, so I listened. One guy in particular sounded like the one in charge. "Okay, are we in position?" another guy answered. I didn't know what his rank was, but clearly he was not in charge of the first guy. "Yes, sir. We know the suspect is here in the building. C team is across the campus as ordered, and B team is covering the back entrances. He will not exit the building on our watch," the chief responded. "Good. Remember, he could look like anyone, but he must not escape. It's my fault he's here, and it's my duty to deal with him." I couldn't hear much for a while. There was too much movement, too many people all talking to each other to make out anybody from where I sat. I just waited for a little while. Maybe it would all just be over soon, and I could leave the closet and go back to class. Then, that's when it all happened. The chief yelled out, "Hold it! Put your hands in the air!" The commotion outside stopped abruptly. A moment later, clothes rustled loudly as what sounded like a large number of guns were drawn. "Lay down on the ground. Leave your hands where we can see them." It stayed quiet except for a few of the guns cocking. I said down the ground. "Don't you dare try what I think you're going to do. You're not at the Institute anymore." I thought I would hear shots go off, back and forth, and eventually somebody saying "suspect down." What I didn't expect was the scream. It wasn't a normal scream. It wasn't somebody crying out in terror. It was like a wounded animal, mixed with the sound of a bandsaw hitting concrete. I've never heard anything like it before, and I hope I never hear it again. Then the guns began to fire. The horrible scream happened again, and then other screams, and then the sounds of tearing. I saw the shadows under the door as people moved and fell over, and heard the telltale splatter of gore as it soaked the floor. There was another gunshot, and I nearly yelled out myself when a bullet punched through part of the doorway. It wasn't very big, but I put my eye up against it, and I could see a group of people being attacked by somebody. But something wasn't right about him. He looked too long in places, like he'd been stretched in a taffy machine. He was moving so fast, though, that I couldn't make anything out, except for him grabbing people and throwing them around like they were nothing. There was blood everywhere. More gunshots. The scream happened again. And again. I pulled away from the bullet hole and sat back in the closet. Then the scream began to fade. I heard a thud, and then more footsteps. The chief spoke again, but he was breathing heavily, like he had been badly wounded. "Team A, he's down. I repeat, he's down. We need a cleanup immediately." I didn't move. I wanted to look again, but as curious as I was, I didn't really want to see, but I heard a lot of commotion for a long time, and then nothing. I don't know how long it was after that, but then the PA announced the lockdown had ended. I came out of the closet. I tried not to look, but for all the sounds I had heard, there was not as much sign of a fight as I thought there would be. Even the blood I had seen in that brief time through the bullet hole had all been removed. I went back to my class and just told everyone I had hid in a stall in the bathroom. People were impressed with my guts for doing it, but if nobody else had heard that scream, I certainly didn't want to bring it up. As you might expect, we all went home early that day. Police and EMT were everywhere, but as far as I could see, nobody was being taken away by either. My parents came and were so happy that I was all right. They had been following everything on the news and came as soon as they could. At home that night, I ate dinner and waited to see what happened on the news. The live coverage had ended a long time ago, but when the news came back on at 10 while, I wanted to see everything. As it started, I saw classes had been cancelled for the rest of the week, but then things started to get weird. The news talked about a student who they refused to name, how he had come to school armed but had been taken into custody after a short firefight. Stranger still, in the footage of the hallway where the scuffle had taken place, the door of the closest which had been my refuge was totally unscathed. Not so much as a scratch on it, let alone bullet holes. It appeared to have been replaced outright, well before any investigation could have been completed. I saw pictures of the student being led away in cuffs. He didn't have a mark on him. He wasn't even wounded as he was pushed into a police car and driven away. All I saw was him fighting and yelling. Even in my glimpses through that bullet hole, I knew that wasn't the same one I saw. The clothes were completely different. The one I had seen had been wearing a black t-shirt and jeans. The one getting into the police car was wearing a white shirt and shorts. The news said no one had been hurt despite the gunfire, but I knew people had been wounded, even killed. I'd heard them screaming in agony as something vicious had attacked them. And then there was what that chief guy had said, talking about something being his fault, the institution, that he could look like anyone. I don't know what happened that day for certain. I didn't see enough, I didn't hear enough to get the full story. But this is what I can tell you. I know there was no shooter at our school. I know that someone was arrested that day, someone who I didn't know, who I never heard about ever again. That's right, a shooter who never made another day's worth of news. Just disappeared. When was the last time that ever happened? I know that chief guy and his squads were not cops. I don't know who they were, but I know cops don't clean up a crime scene like that. And no human being has ever screamed like that. Ever. But whatever it was that I heard attacking those people, all I know is it came into that hallway where I was. I was alone, and if it hadn't been for that janitor's closet, I wouldn't have been safe. It could have looked like anyone. Something tells me that squad wouldn't have helped me either. It could have looked like anyone. What was it? How long had it been in our school? Had I ever been alone with it and never knew what it was? Who were those people who had come for it? Where had it come from? And, good God, is it really dead? Story 3. Lockdown at my elementary school. School lockdown drills are now as common as fire drills. I'm sure every school or county has their own style or individual protocol, but essentially it's the same across the board. Everyone is to get into a classroom, lock the door, turn off the lights, group into a part of the room out of view from the windows and doors, and stay completely silent. The goal is to disappear from whatever hypothetical active shooter is roaming the hallways. Without these drills, well, the same thing would happen as when school shooters first started popping up. Chaos, people fleeing in all directions, creating a frenzy of targets to choose from, and more people would die. More children would die. I am, well, was a counselor for an elementary school. My last position was my second, the first being in a hellhole for 2 years. That first elementary school was a mess, mostly because of the principal. He was old and tired, walking the halls with frazzled white hair and wrinkled button-up shirts with no tie. It seemed he was over it all, counting down the days until his retirement. He showed little interest in my role, practically rolling his eyes at whatever issue brought a child to my door. He clearly had the whole "this generation is soft" mentality. Kids aren't depressed or anxious. They're just whining. He handed out reprimands and punishments without any real investigations and treated the staff poorly. And he slacked on drills. I remembered being horrified on my first fire drill there, standing out in the playground in the near-freezing autumn breeze, surrounded by cold and confused students, as scattered and disorganized as staff tried to somehow get accountability. The staff and I tried to schedule more drills, tried to get him in on planning, but he could care less. Eventually, he was relieved when teachers had enough and went to the board, but by then I lost motivation and needed a change. Where I ended up next was refreshing. The principal, a tall and slim, middle-aged man with a square jaw and kind eyes, always wearing some version of a cartoon-themed tie, and the staff here take their jobs rather seriously, almost to the point of me feeling too intimidated to share ideas during meetings when I first arrived. Fortunately, I loosened up over time, and when everyone saw how much I cared for the children, I was accepted. I loved it there. I quit 2 months later. The reason I quit is something I haven't quite gotten over. I still dream about it. I still hear the sounds that didn't make sense as they were happening, but came together afterward into a horrific realization. I had been making my rounds that day, checking on my more needy students during their classes, making sure no one was on the verge of a meltdown or anything. I remember feeling relieved to be walking around because I had been sitting in the nurse's office with a first grader who ran and slipped on the slick floor. The custodian was in the middle of mopping. Luckily, there was nothing wrong with the child, but I advised the custodian to put up a "caution wet floor" sign before we had a lawsuit on our hands. I was feeling good until lockdown, lockdown, lockdown. It was one of the office administrators over the loudspeaker. At first, I was just surprised. Then I felt my heart jump and my fingertips turn icy as I realized the reason I was surprised. There was no drill scheduled that day, which meant this was not a drill. When the announcement blared, I had just opened the door to peek into a kindergarten classroom. When the overhead speaker clicked, indicating the end of the announcement, my eyes met with the teacher's, Mrs. Jameson. We froze, staring at one another for a good 3 seconds, her standing with a pointer in one hand, with her class all neatly seated on the carpet area. The students were silent, some looking at her and some at me. Then she and I came to some kind of unspoken agreement. Training kicked in. We both sighed casually and smiled down at the kids. Mrs. Jameson said, Well, kids, looks like we got a lockdown drill. Let's show Ms. Vasquez how well we can do. Sounds good to me, I said as I closed the door and pulled down the curtain to the door's tiny window. I'd love to see how this class does during a lockdown drill. I might have some rewards if you do well. Then I remembered something. I said to the teacher, "Janet, I'll be right back," before running out the room. I had remembered the fourth graders were around the corner from where I was, outside their classrooms and scattered all around the hallway, putting up holiday decorations. I was afraid of the chaos that might ensue, kids pushing and shoving to get back to their own classrooms instead of just ducking into the nearest one, as was protocol. Luckily, it wasn't as bad as I thought it'd be. Everyone was calm and well-versed on what to do. I herded some lingering and confused kids into rooms and was about to run back to the kindergarten room when I spotted something out the corner of my eye. When I turned around, I couldn't help but mutter, "Seriously?" At the end of the hallway, sitting just outside the edge of sunlight that casted through the windows of the double-door exit nearby, was a third grader. He was curled up, knees to chest, hood pulled over, but I knew who it was. Charlie, probably doodling in his damn sketchbook, listening to music even though electronic devices were banned. The school had warned him dozens of times, but he always manages to sneak his phone in. Honestly, I've spotted him a few times with the buds in his ears, but let it go. Music and drawing were his thing, and he had it rough at home. I ran over, pulled his hood back, and yanked the earbuds out his ears. "Lock down, sweetie. Come on." I was tempted to sound more urgent, but I wanted to remain casual and not alarm him. Charlie, like all students in that school, took lockdown drills seriously. His eyes widened and he jumped up. We ran over to the nearest room, the computer lab, and I used my key to let him in. Then I hesitated. The right thing to do would be to go in with him. But I thought about Mrs. Janet Jameson. She was young, her second year teaching, and her IA was out sick. I felt I had to help her manage those kids. There was no telling how long this lockdown would last, and she needed the help. I closed the door, turned. I realized I was probably the last one still in the hallway. It was eerie, not having another soul in the hallway. It felt abandoned. No, hallow was the right word. It felt like a hallow, like a cave. I heard footsteps, rhythmic thuds on the linoleum floor. Boots? No, they were softer than that, although too heavy to be sneakers. Or maybe the person making them were big. It was not too far off. I guess I should explain the layout. The school is only one story. From a bird's-eye view, the hallways carve out what looks like two cubes, close stacked on top of each other, the top being where the entrance was. Those two cubes were fused together by the same middle hallway. I was at the far bottom of the bottom cube, close to the left corner. The footsteps sounded as if coming down the left side of the top cube, so that if I were to turn down that left corner, I'd end up far away yet face to face with whoever was there. The main problem was that Janet Jameson's room was down that left side hallway. I took off my flats and tiptoed to the left corner. I was tempted to look, to just peek, but at the same time was too scared the person would see me. The steps stopped and I heard a hard rattling. He was trying a door. When it didn't open, I heard him whisper something, probably cursing to himself, before continuing to walk. And it was a him, judging from that whisper. The voice was too deep to be a woman. I don't know why I waited there, listening to the footsteps coming my way. I suppose I wasn't thinking clearly because I could have just went into the nearest room. Yet I had an anxious one-track mind of getting to Mrs. Jameson's room. The man tried another locked door, another hoarse whisper. I thought I could just sprint to the room, unlock the door, and rush in. No, he'd see me, and that would only draw attention to Mrs. Jameson's room, thus endangering the children. Plus, what if I couldn't get the key in and unlock the door in time before he ran up to me? I took a backward step, preparing to turn and sprint to the right corner if he got too close, when I heard S shift in the echoing steps. I listened and realized he turned down the middle hallway. I drew in a deep breath and exhaled shakily as I braved to peek around the corner. I was right. I saw no one and yet heard another door being tried, so we had to be down that middle hallway. Then, to my surprise, Mrs. Jameson's door opened without a sound. I saw her face appear within the darkness of the room. Our eyes met, and she beckoned me. I didn't hesitate. I didn't want to wait any longer and risk freezing up. I ran and made it in. As soon as I did, Janet carefully closed the door. I saw all the kids clustered in the darkest corner of the room, sitting and staring expectantly at me. "What are you doing?" I whispered harshly to the kindergarten teacher. "You are not supposed to open the door during a lockdown." "Well, you're welcome," she sighed. "I just had a bad feeling because you said you'd be back. Plus, after I heard the last door closed, I heard a couple of your steps. I assumed they were yours because they clicked like shoes, and just knew you were still out there." My shoulders slumped. I could no longer hide my relief or gratefulness. "Thank you, Janet." I saw her teeth show in the dark as she smiled. "No problem. Just help me keep the kids calm and—" We heard a noise outside. It wasn't close, but it was strange, like a heavy thud. "What's that?" asked one of the kids. We shushed him and listened. Silence. Nothing happened for the next 20 or so minutes. Janet and I handed out coloring books and crayons for the kids to color. We made sure everyone for every color. It sounds petty, but the last thing we needed was kids asking to borrow colors and start bickering over it. One of the little girls didn't color. She just stared at us with worrying and waiting eyes. She knew this wasn't a drill. I sat down in one of the small chairs and I signaled her to come to me. She immediately ran over, sat in my lap, and buried her head into my shoulder. I put my arms around her and whispered reassuring words. The rest of the class noticed this, and unfortunately it seemed to make them anxious. Just then we heard footsteps. We all stiffened. The steps were coming our way. Janet and I met eyes. She was completely pale. The footsteps seemed heavier and less rhythmic. At one point there was some shuffling and some rubbing or dragging of clothes. The man must have stumbled and slid against the wall. Was he hurt? Then the steps resumed, getting closer still. My eyes shot toward the door. The girl and I gripped each other hard with rigid bodies. We felt almost fused as one statue. There was ringing in my ears, and my eyes burned as I stared unblinkingly at the doorknob. Then, bang. It was as if someone threw their weight into the door. The kids screamed. Janet screamed. I almost did, but instead put the girl down and ran over to Janet and shook her by the shoulders. She stopped screaming, and I pointed to the horrified children. At that moment, intense weight seemed to come upon us. I felt everything fade away for a moment. The screaming, the darkness of the room, the single heavy knock against the door that followed after the bang. And within our gaze we came to a mutual declaration. The kids. We both thought it. We had to keep them safe. That was all that mattered. "The bookshelf," she blurted. I understood and nodded. In response, I said, "Use the blanket, okay?" She nodded, also understanding. Then we separated. I ran to the bookshelf and began pushing. It was used to hold other supplies like containers of extra glue sticks and yarn, not books, so it was not as heavy as it could have been. But it was heavy. "Shannon, I got it, I got it." The shelf slid across the room, getting easier as I built momentum. The kids were still screaming, but had started to quiet down. I glanced over and saw Janet had already draped the ends of a large green blanket over the coat cubby and another bookshelf so it hung over everyone, like a makeshift tent. Good. It would give the kids a sense of feeling hidden. She heard Janet trying to talk them down. By now, the man was trying the doorknob, and I heard a low grunt. I kept pushing, and finally, with gritted teeth and every muscle in my body hard as rock, I made it. I turned the shelf the long way and rested it against the door. I turned my back to the shelf and leaned against it. "Where's Miss Vasquez?" a child cried out. Then the other kids followed and began anxiously calling out to me. "I'm here, guys." I tried to sound casual, but my voice was shaking. "You guys are the fort, and I'm the lookout." Janet said. "Yes, she's the lookout. She'll tell us if we are clear or in danger. Miss Vasquez, are we clear?" "Oh yes, the danger was here, but it passed. We're all clear, kids." As I said this, I prayed there wasn't another thrash against the door. There wasn't. It all stopped. The doorknob stopped jiggling. Silence. After a few minutes, I slid down to sit on the floor, still leaning against the bookshelf. As the silence settled in, and I called out 5 all clears to the kids to offer consistent reassurance, my body began to slow settle. The moment that crash against the door happened, I felt amped up, light on my feet. Strong. In fact, I remembered when one of these bookshelves were being moved from one classroom to another. It took 2 custodians, grown men, to slide it along with a struggle. I had managed it alone. It was all adrenaline, and now with the kids calm enough to be singing softly along with Janet under the blanket, I was crashing. To top off my sense of ease, I saw flashing red and blue lights coming in through the window. It was over, and I felt sick. I even smelled copper in the air. I rubbed my nose to check for a nosebleed, but strangely saw nothing. I looked at lights dancing across the ceiling. "Yay, guys," I called in the fakest peppy voice. "The policemen are here." They had seen the lights and were already cheering. I tried to say something else. I can't remember what, but it was probably to remind them they still had to remain quiet. Rather than words, I let out a gut-tightening heave. Not much came out, just enough for me to spit. I felt something. Since I was no longer sweating and my skin felt cold and clammy, I became aware of some warmth beneath me, like I was sitting in a puddle. I frowned. I soiled myself, I thought. Great. I shifted to examine my jeans to see if it was urine or feces. I saw darkness on the beige tile. I hesitantly touched it. It was too thick to be urine. And I didn't smell anything. Or rather, I didn't smell any bodily waste. That coppery scent from earlier was stronger now. As I leaned away from the bookshelf, I saw the liquid hadn't come from me, but from beneath the bookshelf. No, not the bookshelf. It came from under the door. A stone dropped in my chest as I realized what the liquid was. It was blood. Blood had been oozing into the room. What the hell? Noise came from the hallway, the calm rumble of footsteps, deep voices in casual conversation, and chaotic static from walkie-talkies. The police, and it didn't sound like they were in a rush. We all heard them coming closer. Then they stopped walking. They stopped talking. We could only hear the only thing heard were the walkies. Why were they just standing there? Then someone among them broke the silence with a "holy shit" before a storm of urgent footsteps came and stopped right outside Janet Jameson's door. Eventually, the all clear was given to every class except ours. Janet and I didn't protest or ask any questions. We were too confused, too overwhelmed and worn out. We were at a point of absolute submission because we thought obedience would make things go faster, and we can just all go home. I asked Janet for the blanket to cover myself and the pool under me before she turned the lights on and allowed the kids to stretch out. I whispered to her about the blood, and she only threw her head back and closed two eyes as if to say, "What else?" After an hour, the window gates were unlocked. Janet, the kids, and I exited the class through the windows, so we didn't have to open the door and see whatever was happening. I looked stupidly at one of the officers after climbing out the window and said, "I have blood on me, it's not mine." I just said it. I felt I had to before they noticed it themselves. The officer just nodded grimly with no sign of surprise. Then he escorted Janet and I to sit at the open end of an ambulance to be examined. When the medics gave the thumbs up, two officers came over. At first they just stood there, heads up but eyes staring at the ground. Then they removed their hats and told us there was a dead body in front of Janet Jameson's classroom door. What do you say to something like that? They paused as if giving us room to react or respond. Janet and I just looked at one another. They looked at us. What did they want us to say? As it turns out, they weren't waiting for a reaction. They were giving moment to let that news sink in before they hit us with another. This time we reacted. This time we jumped up, asking what they meant, asking why and how. We freaked. We acted like they told us the sky just fell. The dead body was the principal. The officers tried to calm us. When we were finally able to sit and listen, one of them offered to explain everything. Then they looked at one another, agreeing on something, before looking directly at me. "We could show you what happened." I tensed up. The other officer quickly added, "From the cameras, he means. You don't have to see him. Watch the recordings." It seemed the invitation was exclusively for me, and Janet didn't say anything. At the time, I didn't understand, but looking back, I think everyone felt I had a right to see. I think they felt I deserved a clear story because I'm the one with someone else's blood all over my pants. I was taken inside the building into the main office. A man with a polo and jeans was seated at one of the administrator's desk, computer ready, waiting for me. With a nod from the officers that escorted me in, the man in the polo hit play. There were 9 camera shots playing at once on the screen, 3 each row, all black and white. They all played pretty much the same thing at that moment, the beginning of the lockdown. Just kids through the halls, into classrooms. Each camera just showed incoherent blurs and shifting shades of gray. In less than a minute, the blurs disappeared, and the hallway was bare. My attention was then drawn to 2 screens. One showed me, taking my shoes off and tiptoeing. The other showed the principal walking down the left side hallway. The principal stopped at a door and grabbed the door handle. The officer next to me said, "The school was transitioning into having new doors, correct? New locks?" We were. Our doors were old and were being upgraded, which meant new locks, which meant new keys. At that point, less than half the rooms in the building had new doors, and not everyone had a key. He was checking the doors, making sure someone didn't end up in a room they didn't have a key to. Of course, I hadn't known that. With a stiff body and wide eyes, I watched my past self on the screen, cowering, truly believing I was in danger. The principal made the turn, and a moment later I was dashing to Janet's room. I was gone. Now there was only the principal. After checking a door, he seemed satisfied, like he all was finished. He leaned into the door and seemed to speak before stepping back. The hoarse whispering. It wasn't cursing. It was him tell the people inside it was only him and not to be afraid. I saw the caution wet floor sign was 3 feet away. I noticed it because something in my gut knew what was going to happen next. The principal slipped. He did a brief little shuffle, almost comedically, before his legs came out from under him. His head bounced off the floor. There was no audio, but I could hear the hollow thump. I could hear it then in my head, because I had heard it in real time. That heavy thud, the one from when we shushed the boy from asking what that noise was. Jesus, that was his head, I said aloud. No one answered. The principal slowly stood, leaving a dark splatter behind on the floor. His legs were shaky legs. He looked left and right, seemingly confused. He held one hand to his head and began to walk back the way he came. He stumbled. His knees shook. By now, darkness was dripping on the floor. Then he slowly sank to the ground, as if he was suddenly sleepy and needed a nap. Then he just lay there. The man in the polo moved the computer mouse to slide the time bar to 22 minutes later. As if fast-forwarded, a dark mass appeared and grew into a perfect circle around the principal's head. The video resumed with the principal stirring. He stood and stepped back, seemingly horrified by the pool of darkness. He stepped around the puddle and walked. I squinted and saw he had dropped something. He rounded the corner, making his way to the closest room for help, Janet's room. He wavered on rubbery legs. At one point, he leaned against the wall as he walked a few steps, sliding along with his shoulder before pushing off and trying to balance again. He finally made it to Janet's door and fell against it. We had screamed. He raised a fist and gave one strong pound before trying the knob. He patted his pockets, looked around, slumped his head, and tried the knob again. The thing he had dropped. His keys. I felt hot tears run down my cheeks as I watched him sink down to sit with his back against the door. His head drooped, and that was it. The man in the polo stopped the video but kept looking at the screen. I shook my head, feeling confused even though there was nothing to be confused about. I thought about where I had been at that point in the video. I had been sitting with my back against the bookcase, which means he and I had been sitting back to back, just feet apart, while he slowly bled out and died. And I had sat his blood, the blood that dripped from his cracked head. The children sang softly as the darkness pooled and soaked into my pants. And it was me. I had kept him out. No, I didn't know. I felt cold and afraid. I stepped back away from the officers. I didn't mean to kill him. The officer's face dropped. What? No. Ma'am, no, we aren't blaming you. We just felt you should know because I did it, right? I was losing sense of reality. I couldn't feel my legs and felt like I was somehow floating and sinking at the same time. I'm going to jail. I should, because I fucking kept him out. Ma'am, I shoved a goddamn bookcase against the door. The officer was shaking his head, reaching out to me. I passed out. I quit being a counselor. Actually, I just stopped showing up. It was Janet who was kind enough to speak to the school county administration. She managed to turn my unannounced permanent absence into an official resignation. No one argued. No one asked me to sign or do anything. No one bothered me because they all knew. They all knew I let him die. Janet said they all feel sorry for us, her and I, that they all sympathized with our situation. But I know that's bullshit. I ripped up every get well card and popped every we miss you balloon that got delivered. They're all pretending, acting as if I hadn't let Daniel Seymour Hutchins, a married man with 2 children at home and 253 others at work, slip away in an empty hallway, alone. I don't call him by name. I prefer to remember him as the principal. It creates some distance, like we were only co-workers, strictly professional. Not at all like he was the shoulder I cried on when I broke up with my boyfriend, or the man who went over the spending limit for me when we did the blind gift exchange for Christmas. To top it off, we were never really in any danger. The lockdown was initiated because the police were called by a witness who claimed to see a man with a gun wandering the streets just a few blocks away, drunkenly harassing people. When the police arrived, the man was in fact very drunk and did have a gun. A brief standoff between he and the police went on for half an hour before the drunk gave up. And guess what? When the police examined the weapon, it turned out to be fake. It turned out to be a fucking paintball pistol. But that doesn't upset nearly as much as the thought that still haunts me. I could have just fucking looked. That's all I can think. There were 2 instances where I could have just looked and saved everything. The first time I could have just poked my head around that corner and saw the principal walking my way. Then I would have put my shoes back on, step out, and give him a wave. And he would have approached me and passed right by that yellow caution wet floor sign. The other time I could have looked was when I gave the second all clear to Janet and the kids. I can deny it all I want. I can it on retrospect, but I had known. I had known at that moment something wasn't right because just then I realized we hadn't heard any footsteps walking away from the door. So why the silence, I had thought briefly, if they were still there? At that moment I thought about standing up, reaching across the bookshelf, and pushing the door window's curtain aside to peek out into the hallway. If I had, I would have saw the blood trail leading to the door. Then I would have looked down to see the principal slumped over. I would have shoved the shelf aside, opened the door, and used that stupid green tend blanket to apply pressure and stop the bleeding. I would have done all that, but I didn't. I didn't because protocol said stay away from the windows and doors, and plus, I was just plain scared. I ignored my gut and hid behind procedure. I was a coward. When I lay awake at night, I always hear a thump. What follows are the sounds of the principal walking and stumbling through my apartment. I can hear his feet on the linoleum, even though I have carpet. I hear his shoulder brushing against the wall. Then I hear the heavy crash and knock on my closed bedroom door. I can almost see the knob jiggling. At that point, I always get up and frantically pull the bedroom door open. I do it every time. And every single night, without fail, I collapse into tears when I see no one is there.